Well, good Friday afternoon to you. Nice to be seeing you. I am Dylan Ratigan. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. Today's big story, unfortunately, is the war against the war, or fortunately, perhaps. So around the world today, it's a tough news day on that front. Both our allies and our enemies are looking at the United States and once again shaking their heads with disgust. First, those appalling and outrageous pictures of 4 U.S. Marine snipers urinating on dead Afghan militants. But lest you've been in the theater of war, which I have not, I suggest you suspend, at least for the moment, judgment. Multiple investigations are underway, but Washington obviously has major PR damage control to do around the world. The backlash here at home and abroad, similar to what happened after the 2004 Abu Ghraib abuse pictures surfaced. Fingers at the same time being pointed at the United States government for possibly assisting the Israeli Mossad. They are being blamed for the assassination of an Iranian nuclear scientist in broad daylight in a drive-by bombing. The U.S. denies any role, but with the White House committed to preventing Iran from obtaining a nuke, does that mean that covert ops and assassinations are indeed on the table? And is that really what we're witnessing? Iran now hinting at possible revenge assassinations. Washington, meanwhile, also reportedly using back channels to threaten Iran to back down on their threat to close the Straits of Hormuz or face retaliation. This has all the earmarks of a red herring or saber rattling, although one never knows. You should know that we have two U.S. aircraft carriers positioned in the region, and a third one is on the way. So why do we care so much about the saber rattling over these straits? Well, it's a 35-mile waterway, and 20% of the world's oil flows through it every single day. Understand, shutting it off is suicide for Iran and the world, not likely a path of rational pursuit, although you never know. We start with two folks who know the region better than certainly I and than most of us. Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Shaffer from the Center for Advanced Defense Studies and Iranian-American journalist Roya Hakakian, author of Assassins of the Turquoise Palace. We're going to hit a couple of places here, Tony, but let's start with the picture and the outrage and all the rest of it. Is this sort of thing little more than an indication that we've been there too long? Is this what happens naturally or unnaturally? I don't know how to describe it, but basically, yes, when the duration gets this long and it gets this absurd, you end up with atrocities.
Right. You always have bad actors. I'm not defending it. I'm very close to the Marines. But two things, Dylan. First, you never videotape something like that. That's just stupid right there. Beyond that, this is not Abu Ghraib. This is bad. They need to deal with it directly. But frankly, part of the problem over the fact we've been in 10 years now is that we've been allowing folks with criminal records. If you remember last year, there were Army specialists who were killing farmers in Afghanistan for sport. What we've done is diminished the standards. And what you see now is you have more kids with bad habits coming in. I think you're going to find that this was probably one of those cases where these kids should never have been in the military to begin with.
Right, but that goes to the decision to use 0.5% of the American population and ask those people to re-enlist again and again.
That's correct.
And again. So I guess my question to you is how much of the American policy of relying on 0.5% of the population for the war, re-enlisting these people, opening up the enlistment view as a function of a policy? It's easy to sit here and point fingers at some guy who did something that is horrible. It doesn't help solve the problem, though.
Well, I think we got to go back to a pre-9/11 military, frankly. We could have done everything we needed to prevent 9/11, the debate from the day. But we got to get back to the level of where we can sustain military forces and actually go after our objectives. Right now, we are an expeditionary military. I agree with Jim DeMint. We got to consider the fact, and you always talk about economics, we cannot afford a sustained overseas presence to the level we're at right now. We've got to take the pressure off the military. That's the best thing we can do forward.
And speaking of pursuing missions, Roya, somebody was pursuing a mission in Iran recently with the assassination of a nuclear scientist. What is your perspective on the conjecture? I know that nobody really seems to know what happened, obviously, but what is your perspective on the conjecture about Israel, the U.S., whether Iran did it themselves? Those seem to be the three narratives.
There's also a third narrative that I have recently come upon, which strikes me as being extremely interesting and intriguing and something we ought to consider, which is that it could be the work of the Iranian government itself in order to purge elements. Because, as you know, Iran at the moment is under a great deal of pressure, and there is a lot of fracturing inside the regime, fractures that need to be sorted out, and this would be one way. In absence of evidence that Iran has yet to present, while it points to the U.S. and Israel, the third possibility that I'm presenting could be one.
Yeah. Let's talk about this covert operation. Tony,
Sure.
you were in covert operations. Let's just cut to the chase. Have you ever ridden a motorcycle and put a bomb on a car?
No, we've done similar things with things we attach to things, but not that one. So with that said, I think, there's clearly something up with this. I agree with her assessment. I think we have to look at the fact and, frankly, leverage the fact that you have huge fractionalization within the Iranian government. In some ways, and I talked to an expert about this right before I went on the air, this expert I talked to said, look, the more pressure we put on the Iranians, the more they will double down against us and unify the people against us. So in some ways, this whole idea of poking them in the eye may be counterproductive to actually allowing these factions to go in, push the government out, and bring a reformist government to power.
How much of Iran's political power, internally through your perspective, is supported by maintaining the enemy as outside of the country, whether it's America or anybody else, as a vehicle to prevent having to deal with the internal issues?
Everything depends on that. I mean, there are a lot of fracturing within the regime at the moment, but all of them are united at the moment in the notion that the idea of war, the saber rattling, and the potential that a war could start is something that could extend the survival of the Iranian regime.
Yeah, and you mentioned saber rattling. We have plenty of it right now around the Straits of Hormuz. Probably an increasingly more people probably learning about geography at this point in the Middle East than they have in a while. It's a narrow passage. A lot of oil goes through it. It's sort of the hot spot, if you will. We talk about hot spotting. If you wanted to really pick one place on the earth where you could intervene with oil supplies, that would be the spot. Your perspective on the saber rattling from both sides?
Well, Iran's economy has suffered a blow in the last only a few weeks in a way that it has not suffered in the last 32 years. The currency, the Iranian currency, has dropped in its value by nearly 15%. And this has created a great deal of stress, not only on the ordinary people, but also on the regime. So in light of that, for the regime to say that it would shut down the Strait of Hormuz, it would be to shoot themselves in the foot, to say the least, because it would worsen a really ill economy at the moment.
And I tend to agree with that perspective, Tony. The saber rattling is sort of easy to get people worked up, right. But if you put yourself in the chair in Iran, and I didn't even know about the 15% currency devaluation the past couple of weeks, it would be utter suicide for Iran to deprive themselves of the only flow of cash that they really have, and it's a massive one.
And let's consider, they're doing what the North Koreans have always done very well, brinksmanship. It's not about actually doing things to prompt us to action. It's taking us up to that brink and then backing off. They are a net importer of gas. They can't refine it to meet their own requirements. And frankly, as she just pointed out, they would lose big time in any circumstance where that strait is not open to allow them to export the 20% or the one-third of the, somewhere in that percentage of oil out to actually have income coming in. They're all about maintaining power, Dylan. That's what the government there is trying to do. And if you look at it and understand it from that perspective, you'll understand everything else they're doing.
So, Roya, in that context, what would you recommend to the people who watch this program, to those who have an interest in this? What should we know? What should we learn about the nature of those power dynamics so we can get better at sifting through the nonsense and understanding what's really going on?
Well, there's a lot I could say, but let me start by saying that now that we're in the middle of an election year again, let's hope that in this round of elections that both the Republicans and the Democrats would be smart enough and would have learned their lessons from at least the last round of elections, that we should have a bipartisan position on the subject of Iran. In the last round of elections, if you remember, McCain and Obama had two diagonally opposed positions on the subject of Iran.
And what would you suggest that would be?
Let us agree that negotiations have not been helpful. Let us agree that we have come this far and that we should keep pressure on economically. Let us also agree that war with Iran is a bad idea. And that we have created this pressure, which is yielding in the kind of results that we haven't seen in 32 years. And let us hope that the next administration will move forward from this point.
I have got to wrap this, but in the context of the currency devaluation, I do wonder whether the stick is obvious in terms of the punishment and deprivation and the sanctions. Is there an opportunity for the international community to provide a carrot to Iran right now while they're sweating the currency devaluation and say, listen, we will lift the sanctions, we will drive investment if you disarm now at a time when they're experiencing vastly more pain and as a result may have a greater incentive?
Well, the carrot I would like for them to present, whether Iran would take it or not is up to question, is free all the political prisoners that you took in after the uprisings of 2009. Hold a free and open election in the next round of presidential elections.
Those are demands, not a carrot. The carrot would be the opportunity to get investment and relief of sanctions if you complied with those things.
Well, but
right?
Dylan, I think we haven't delivered enough sticks to Iran to live up to our demands. And Iran has set a lot of the demands thus far, and we have met them. So let's do the reverse and let us deliver a couple of more sticks before we offer them a carrot.
Understood. Listen, Roya, thank you so much for your insight and your perspective. It is unique and very valuable to this conversation. Tony, the same thing goes for you. I thank both of you. Tony Shaffer, Roya Hakakian, Roya's book, Assassins of the Turquoise Palace.